All right, Ms. Rasko, what's your, if you look into the ivory ball?
We think it will remain around 9.5. Maybe it will get to 9. Right now, there are a few who are offering 9.25. However,
my producer suggested that we should look into the crystal ball instead of the ivory ball. But nevertheless, okay, so that we're talking about nothing that is radical in terms of this panel's view of where the interest rates will go down. Now, let's go around the panel and talk about who should refinance.
Well, I would say people who expect to stay in their existing house or are going to move into stay in their existing house a substantial number of years. That'll enable them to amortize the closing costs, the extra fees associated with refinancing over a long period of time.
I mean, does it get down to specifics about whether or not, for example, you had clearly if you had something, say, at 13%, you would really want to start shopping, would you not?
Of course, no doubt.
All right, now, but what if you were, say, at 11%?
Well, then it comes down to dollars and cents, John, and I think that's just what has to be done. The exercise has to be gone through with the calculator and the pad of paper and saying just how much is it going to cost, how much will I save, and how long will it take me before I start getting into the black.
Right. Now, you and I are going to do that in a minute, but
That's
just
right.
a couple of more questions. That is, are there any obvious, screaming ground rules about people who should not expect to refinance?
people who are planning to move and know they'll be moving within a year or so probably would not save enough considering the closing costs again and the points they'd have to pay again.
Now, when we use the term point, what we're talking about is a percentage of the mortgage loan. Is that correct?
Right,
If you owed
right.
$100,000, it would be a $1,000 point, and if you had 3 of those, that's a $3,000 point.
Right.
People want to know, I think some people who aren't familiar with real estate want to know, why do you get charged a point on something like on a home mortgage, but you don't when you go out and buy a $20,000 car or something?
Perhaps our banker should really answer that, but my own view is that it's simply a way to collect interest up front. And the amount of interest actually charged on the mortgage then is supposedly in accordance with that amount, a little lower than it would be if we didn't have that method.
But it seems to me that all you do on a typical mortgage is collect interest up front for the first 10 years. About all you're paying is interest. How much up front do you need?
That's right.
Ms. Barnett, how do you feel about points? I mean, why do we pay them?
Well, points are an additional charge to the lender. Now, those points may be split in some way between the originating lender and an end purchaser of these mortgages. A lot of these mortgages are being sold off on a secondary market, which we may want to get into a little later. So maybe the originating lender is not appreciating that full amount, but I think borrowers have to be aware that the points work together with the rate to create a combined yield, and that is called an annual percentage rate and will be disclosed by the lender.
Can you negotiate points?
In today's market, where loans are being priced to meet yields to a secondary purchaser, there's not too much flexibility.
Another question,
in
I think a lot of questions. Yes, Herb.
John, I'd say there are two reasons for points. One is there are costs involved in terms of going through the process. And in order for a financial institution to make the mortgage marketable, that is so it can sell it into the open market, it has to fulfill certain requirements, which are
You
costly.
actually have to hire people.
Right.
You have to employ
And the
them.
other factor is this, that a financial institution likes to protect itself against declining rates. That is, all these mortgages are being refinanced. Now, in contrast, if they owned a government bond, government bonds are not callable, and therefore there is a reason for the extra points, because if the rates were to come down another 2%, then the financial institutions do not have a 9.5%, 9.75% rate. They would have to refinance it again at a lower rate.
If you do refinance, is it common to refinance with the company or the bank or the company that you did business with in the first place?
I would suggest that one go to that institution first because they're familiar with the mortgage. In other words, you're a customer of theirs and you may get a slightly better arrangement there.
Any other opinions on that?
It's a good place to start, but I think a lot of people are shoppers these days, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. And if they do end up coming back to their original lender, they're that much more comfortable with what they're doing.
All right, now, Barbara, we have some graphics here, and let's let you begin, and we'll let our other guests chime in with questions or comments if they want. But why don't you take us through this $80,000 mortgage, 30-year mortgage, and we'll talk about what the monthly payments are at 12%, which is $822.89. And then if you refinance at 9.5%, you're down to $672.68. And that's $150 monthly savings. Now, is this fairly typical of what's going on at this time?
Very typical, John.
Okay, now let's go with our $80,000. Let's go take a look at some of the closing costs associated with that. Now, here's the kind of information that indicates whether or not whether a person's really interested or not. Points, 3%, $2,400. Is that typical?
3% is a very typical charge, what you might even want to call a benchmark. Anything higher than that, you would almost expect to have a lower interest rate because the higher upfront charge would offset a lower rate. Anything lower than that, conversely, you'd expect a higher contract mortgage rate.
And you've got other things there, application fee of $250, an appraisal fee, credit report fee, title insurance and recording, settlement, hazard insurance, those kinds of things. And I think in our mock-up we've got something like a total closing costs of $3,445. Now, you have then to make a judgment on how long you're going to live there in order to figure out whether or not those costs, what I'll call upfront costs now, are going to make it worthwhile. Is that true?
Exactly.
So in our scenario, you begin saving after 23 months.
That's right.
23 times 150. I guess is what it is. It adds up to $3,445. Now,
John, I would say you should save somewhat more than that, because that's simply dividing it through by the maximum amount. You could have invested the $3,400 in anything like a money market fund, it'd be earning 6 to 7%.
Okay, so that's another consideration when you want to take a look at what it depends on what your values are.
Right.
Right? Okay.
John, at
Yes.
this point, too, though, that's where many of the young people decide instead of refinancing, they will sell that home and buy another. Many of them are doing that.
All right, now let's talk about that for just 1 second, then we'll go back to the graphics. You have an appreciation going on in parts of this market that are what, 10, 12%?
And more.
And
in
more?
in some areas, more.
Where?
In certain areas of Wilmette, we're well over 20 this year.
So that people, you might be reasonably comfortable there, but you're saying this is a prime time to sell.
Right.
But the big question mark there then becomes, have you got someplace to live, right?
Well, many of the people who have held on to their homes, older people, have decided this is the year to sell it and scale down.
No, but I'm talking about the younger person who's saying, maybe, maybe this is a time for me to make a killing. So the good news is I'm going to make more money. I thought I might be stuck with growth appreciation of 3 or 4%, but now I can sell.
Exactly.
I have friends who went through that and very excited about the price they got. They only have one problem: they don't have any place. They don't have any place to live, and they got to be out by June 21st.
It's really tricky.
Consequently, if they're going to live in the same neighborhood, they're simply going to pay that much higher for their next house.
All right, so it isn't necessarily smart then to sell under these conditions just for the purposes you think of making some money.
I would say not. Right.
You could really get burned, and you could also get burned, could you not, on the quality of the housing then? Because you're rushing. Now you start to panic. Oh, I need a place to live. And you go out, and they're being sold, are they not, before the wax can dry on the kitchen floor?
Well, in a market that's as brisk as ours right now, a better plan is to sell the house and then find the house and then sell the one they're living in.
Okay.
Because it's been a long time since we've been able to do that with comfort, but now it's possible.